What if I told you that Abraham Lincoln's assassination could have been prevented by a guard who simply stayed in his chair? Or that the president was murdered during the worst joke in a forgettable play? Or that the assassin broke his leg making a dramatic stage exit and still thought he'd be remembered as a hero? April 14th, 1865 was supposed to be a celebration. The war was over. The Union was saved. Lincoln just wanted to watch a comedy and relax for the first time in 4 years. Instead, that night became the moment American history pivoted, when a famous actor decided murder was good theater, and when a series of small, preventable failures combined into catastrophe. Before we begin, if you enjoy falling asleep to bizarre historical deep dives, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. New videos drop regularly, and your algorithm will thank you. Now get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's talk about one of the strangest, saddest nights in American history, when everything that could go wrong did, and a nation lost the man who saved it. Starting with a calm spring evening that was about to become anything but calm. The calm before the curtain rises. So here we are, drifting into April of 1865, and Washington is doing something it hasn't done in 4 years. Breathing. The Civil War is basically over. Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse just 5 days ago on April 9th, and suddenly the Capitol feels like someone finally opened a window in a room that's been sealed shut since 1861. People are celebrating in the streets. There are actual smiles happening. It's almost unsettling. And there, in the White House, is Abraham Lincoln, looking about as rested as your phone battery at 2%. The man has aged roughly 30 years in 4. If you've seen the photographs, you know what I'm talking about. The face that entered office in 1861 versus the face in 1865 might as well belong to different people. War will do that to you, especially a war that killed more Americans than every other American war combined, before or since. But on this particular April evening, the 14th to be exact, Lincoln is in what passes for a good mood, which is notable because good moods haven't exactly been his signature vibe lately. His son Robert just returned safely from the war. The Union is intact. Reconstruction is going to be complicated and messy, sure, but at least there's something to reconstruct. The killing has stopped. That alone is worth celebrating. The evening feels peaceful in that way that should probably make you nervous if you know how stories work. You know that feeling when everything seems too calm, too perfect, like the universe is setting you up for something. That's April 14th, 1865, in a nutshell. The kind of day where you think, maybe things are finally going to be okay, which is historically the exact moment when things are absolutely not going to be okay. Lincoln had been having dreams lately, disturbing ones. About 2 weeks earlier, he told his wife Mary and a few friends about a dream where he walked through the White House and found a corpse lying in state in the East Room. When he asked who had died, someone told him it was the president, killed by an assassin. Which is the kind of dream you really don't want to have when you're the president. But Lincoln, being Lincoln, had this oddly fatalistic streak. He didn't seem particularly alarmed by his own subconscious trying to send him a very clear memo. The city itself is lit up with celebrations, candles in windows, flags everywhere, bands playing in the streets. It's the kind of atmosphere where tragedy feels impossible, which is, of course, exactly when tragedy tends to show up fashionably late to the party. Washington in mid-April is finally shaking off the weight of 4 years of death and division, and people are desperate for normalcy. They want to laugh. They want to see a play. They want to remember what it feels like to think about something other than casualty lists. Ford's Theater, that modest brick building on 10th Street, is putting on a comedy tonight. A British comedy, actually, called Our American Cousin, which is about as light and forgettable as entertainment gets. The kind of play you'd watch and then immediately forget you watched. Perfect for a city that just wants to exhale for a few hours. Lincoln himself hasn't been particularly interested in going to the theater tonight. He's tired. He's been tired for 4 solid years, but Mary wants to go, and honestly, the man probably figures he owes her an evening out after everything. Plus, there's a certain symbolism to the president being seen in public, relaxed, enjoying a comedy. It sends a message. The war is over. We can laugh again. Everything is going to be fine. Everything is not going to be fine. Somewhere else in Washington, a man named John Wilkes Booth is also preparing for the evening. He's an actor, actually quite famous, and he knows Ford's Theater the way you know your own kitchen in the dark. He's performed there dozens of times. He knows every entrance, every hallway, every sight line, and he's been thinking about this night for a while now. Not in the I'm excited to see a play way, but in the I'm about to fundamentally alter American history way. But we'll get to him in a moment. For now, just picture Washington as the sun sets on April 14th, the gas lamps flickering to life, the sound of celebration still echoing through the streets. Abraham Lincoln, tall and exhausted and cautiously hopeful, preparing to spend a rare evening doing something normal. And somewhere in that same city, a different kind of preparation is happening, the kind that doesn't end with applause and curtain calls. The calm before the curtain rises, you might say. Though, of course, by the time the curtain falls, nothing will be calm ever again. John Wilkes Booth, the complicated celebrity. Let's talk about John Wilkes Booth because understanding what happened that night requires understanding the man who made it happen, and John Wilkes Booth was, to put it mildly, a lot. Born in 1838 in Maryland, Booth came from what you might call theatrical royalty. His father, Junius Brutus Booth, was one of the most famous Shakespearean actors in America. Yes, his middle name was actually Brutus, which in retrospect feels like the universe planning some pretty heavy foreshadowing. John Wilkes was named after the English radical John Wilkes, because apparently the Booth family was really committed to dramatic historical references from birth. By his 20s, John Wilkes Booth had become genuinely famous in his own right. Not his father's son famous, but actually legitimately famous. Women would reportedly swoon at his performances. Critics praised his intensity and physical presence on stage. He was handsome in that very specific 1860s way, with dark wavy hair and a mustache that he probably spent an unreasonable amount of time maintaining. The kind of guy who definitely practiced his brooding expression in the mirror. He made serious money too. By 1864, Booth was earning about $20,000 a year from acting, which in modern money is somewhere around $500,000. For playing pretend on stage, he was living extremely well, performing to packed houses, and generally existing in that rarefied celebrity atmosphere where people treat your opinions as important even when they absolutely aren't. And oh, did Booth have opinions? He was a Confederate sympathizer, which wasn't unusual for someone from Maryland, a slave state that stayed in the Union mostly because Lincoln basically forced it to. But Booth's devotion to the Confederate cause went beyond sympathy. It was obsessive. He viewed Lincoln as a tyrant, the Union as an oppressive force, and slavery as a positive good that needed defending. His political views were, to put it generously, not great. The weird thing is, Booth never actually fought for the Confederacy. He was too busy being famous and making money. While other men his age were dying in places like Gettysburg and Antietam, Booth was on stage, performing to audiences who paid good money to watch him emote. He promised his mother he wouldn't enlist, and he kept that promise, but the guilt seemed to eat at him. Here he was, a passionate Confederate supporter, contributing absolutely nothing to the actual cause, except hot air and strong feelings. As the war dragged on and the Confederacy started losing badly, Booth's rhetoric got more intense. He attended Lincoln's second inauguration in March of 1865, standing close enough to the president that he could have touched him. He later told his sister, "What an excellent chance I had to kill the president if I had wished," which is not a normal thing to say about an inauguration you attended. Booth surrounded himself with a small group of Confederate sympathizers, people who shared his increasingly desperate worldview. Originally, his plan wasn't assassination, it was kidnapping. He wanted to abduct Lincoln and smuggle him to Richmond, trading him for Confederate prisoners of war. It was an absolutely insane plan that had no realistic chance of working, but Booth was committed to it. He recruited others, made elaborate preparations, and waited for the right moment. That moment never came. Every kidnapping opportunity fell through. And then, on April 9th, Lee surrendered at Appomattox. The war was over. The Confederacy was done. Everything Booth believed in had lost. For most people, that would be the end of the story. But Booth wasn't most people. He was a celebrity who had convinced himself he was destined for greatness, a passionate ideologue who'd watched his cause collapse, and an actor who understood drama and symbolism and the power of a grand gesture. Losing the war didn't make him give up. It made him pivot. If he couldn't save the Confederacy, he decided, he could at least avenge it. He could punish the man he blamed for its destruction. He could do something so dramatic, so shocking, that history would have no choice but to remember his name forever, which, to be fair, is exactly what happened, though probably not in the way he imagined. By April 14th, Booth had abandoned the kidnapping plot and settled on something simpler and more final. He would kill Lincoln, and because he was an actor who couldn't help himself, he would do it in a theater, in front of an audience, with maximum dramatic impact. The man preparing to commit murder that night wasn't some deranged loner operating in isolation. He was a celebrity, a wealthy performer, someone people recognized on the street and asked for autographs, which made what he was about to do even stranger and, in some ways, even more chilling. But before the trigger gets pulled, before history pivots on a single bullet, there's one more day to get through. One more ordinary, extraordinary day in the life of Abraham Lincoln, who had no idea his final hours were already counting down. Lincoln's Day, a president trying to feel normal, April 14th, 1865, starts the way most of Lincoln's days start, early and already exhausting. He wakes in the White House, that drafty, somewhat shabby building that won't actually become the gleaming symbol of American power for another few decades. In 1865, it's more like a tired government office building where the president happens to sleep. Lincoln gets maybe 5 hours of rest on a good night, which this probably wasn't, and rises to a day that's already packed with meetings, decisions, and people who need things from him. The morning cabinet meeting starts at 11. Lincoln is in a good mood, which his cabinet members notice immediately because it's unusual enough to be remarkable. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton is there, along with Secretary of State William Seward, Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles, and others. They discuss Reconstruction, that enormously complicated question of how to put a shattered nation back together. Lincoln's position is relatively lenient. Bring the Confederate States back into the Union quickly, without excessive punishment or humiliation. Not everyone agrees, but this morning, Lincoln seems confident and almost cheerful. He tells them about his dream from the night before, not the disturbing one about finding his own corpse in the White House. That was earlier. This dream is different. He's on a ship, moving rapidly toward a distant shore. It's a dream he's had before, he tells them, and it's always preceded important news. He had it before Antietam, before Gettysburg, before other major moments. He expects to hear something significant soon. Everyone nods politely, because what else do you do when the president tells you about his recurring boat dream? The meeting wraps up, and Lincoln spends the afternoon dealing with the usual presidential duties. Office seekers wanting appointments, pardons to consider. The thousands of tiny decisions that pile up when you're running a country. At some point, he signs a pardon for a Union deserter because Lincoln basically can't help himself when it comes to pardons. The man had a soft spot for soldiers who ran away, having never served in combat himself. Around 2 in the afternoon, he takes a walk with Mary. This is actually notable because Lincoln taking leisurely strolls with his wife isn't exactly a regular occurrence. They talk about the future, about what they'll do when his presidency is over. Maybe travel to California, maybe go to Europe, maybe just rest for the first time in years. Mary would later remember him being more hopeful and relaxed than he'd been in ages, the kind of conversation that feels precious in retrospect, knowing what's coming. Somewhere during the day, the decision gets made to attend Ford's Theater that evening. It's not Lincoln's idea, really. Mary wants to go. The theater has advertised that the president will be attending, which creates a certain social obligation. And besides, after 4 years of war, going to see a comedy sounds perfectly reasonable. Originally, Ulysses S. Grant and his wife are supposed to join them. Grant is the man of the hour, the general who won the war, and having him at the theater alongside Lincoln would make the evening even more symbolic. But Julia Grant doesn't want to go. She and Mary Lincoln have a difficult relationship, the kind where they're polite in public but would rather eat glass than spend an evening together. So the Grants decline, claiming they need to visit their children in New Jersey. Lincoln tries to find other guests. He asks a few different people, and they all have various excuses. Finally, a young couple agrees to join them. Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée Clara Harris, daughter of a New York senator. They're not exactly Lincoln's first choice for theater companions, but they'll do. The day winds down. Lincoln has dinner. He's tired but content. The war's over. His son is safe. The country survived. Tonight, he gets to sit in a theater and watch people pretend to be other people for a few hours, which is about as normal and peaceful as life gets for a president. Around 8:15, the Lincoln's carriage pulls up to the White House. Lincoln climbs in, tall and slightly stooped, wearing his usual black suit and that famous stovepipe hat he'll leave in the presidential box and never retrieve. Mary joins him, dressed for an evening out. They pick up Rathbone and Harris, making small talk in the carriage. The streets are busy, people are still celebrating. The carriage makes its way through Washington toward 10th Street, toward Ford's Theater, toward a building that Lincoln has been to before and will, in a few hours, never leave alive. He doesn't know that, of course. Right now, he's just a man going to see a play, looking forward to a few hours of laughter and forgetting. A brief moment of normalcy in a life that's been anything but normal for the past 4 years. The carriage pulls up to the theater. The presidential party is late, arriving around 8:30, which means the play has already started. But that's fine. They're the president. Everyone will wait. Lincoln steps out of the carriage, still thinking about California and Europe and all the peaceful tomorrows he's planning. He has no idea he's walking toward his last hour. No idea that somewhere in this same building, a famous actor he's never met is about to make sure those peaceful tomorrows never come. But that moment is still a little while away. First, there's a theater to enter and a box to settle into and a play to half watch while thinking about everything except what's about to happen. The decision to go to the theater. The thing about fateful decisions is that they rarely feel fateful when you're making them. They feel mundane, ordinary, like choosing what to have for dinner or whether to bring an umbrella. The decision to attend Ford's Theater on April 14th, 1865, was exactly that kind of decision. Right up until it became the most consequential choice, Abraham Lincoln never got to regret. It actually starts with an advertisement. Ford's Theater announces in the newspapers that President Lincoln will attend the evening performance of Our American Cousin on April 14th, which is a bit presumptuous considering Lincoln hasn't actually confirmed he's going. But John T. Ford, who owns the theater, knows how this works. Advertise that the president is coming, and the president feels socially obligated to actually show up. It's emotional blackmail masquerading as event planning. Mary Lincoln wants to go. She's been cooped up in the White House, dealing with her own depression and grief. Their son Willie died 3 years earlier in 1862, and Mary never really recovered. She's not easy to live with on the best of days. And these haven't been the best of days. An evening at the theater, seeing a light comedy, getting out of that oppressive house, sounds like exactly what she needs. Lincoln, characteristically, doesn't particularly care one way or another. He's exhausted. He'd probably rather stay home and read or meet with people or stare at the ceiling, contemplating the weight of Reconstruction. But Mary wants to go, and Lincoln has learned over 20 plus years of marriage that sometimes the path of least resistance is just saying yes. The Grant situation is where it gets interesting. Ulysses S. Grant is the most famous man in America right now, possibly more famous than Lincoln himself. He's the general who won the war, the hero of Appomattox, the man everyone wants to see and celebrate. Having him at the theater alongside Lincoln would make the evening a major social event. Two titans of the Union, relaxed and victorious, watching a comedy together while the city celebrates peace. So Lincoln invites the Grants. And initially, it seems like they'll come. But then Julia Grant throws a wrench in the plan, and that wrench is named Mary Lincoln. Julia Grant and Mary Lincoln do not get along. At all. Mary can be difficult and demanding and emotionally volatile, and Julia has exactly zero interest in spending an evening trapped in a theater box with her. When the invitation comes, Julia immediately tells her husband she wants to decline. Grant, being Grant, comes up with a diplomatic excuse. They'll say they need to visit their children in New Jersey. Perfectly reasonable. Nobody's feelings get hurt. Everyone saves face. So the Grants send their regrets, and Lincoln is left scrambling to find replacement guests because showing up to the theater with just his wife looks sad, and the advertisement has already promised a presidential appearance. He tries several people. His close friend Ward Hill Layman, who usually acts as an informal bodyguard, is out of town. His secretary John Nicolay declines. George Ashmun, a former congressman, also says no. It's like trying to organize a dinner party and everyone suddenly remembering they have other plans. Finally, Lincoln asks Major Henry Rathbone and Clara Harris. Rathbone is a military officer, and Harris is the daughter of Senator Ira Harris of New York. They're young, socially prominent, and apparently free that evening. They accept. Problem solved. The presidential party will be 4 people instead of the hoped-for powerhouse duo of Lincoln and Grant, but it'll do. There's one other element that makes this decision particularly significant, though nobody knows it at the time. John Wilkes Booth has been following Lincoln's movements for weeks, looking for an opportunity. Earlier kidnapping plots fell through because Lincoln's schedule kept changing, or the circumstances weren't right. Booth needs Lincoln to be somewhere predictable, somewhere Booth knows intimately, somewhere he can control. When Booth learns that Lincoln will be at Ford's Theater that evening, it's like the universe handing him everything he's been waiting for. Booth knows that theater. He's performed there countless times. He knows every entrance, every exit, every hallway, every sightline. He knows the backstage area where he can prepare. He knows the route to the presidential box. He knows when the audience will be loudest and most distracted. It's not just an opportunity. It's a perfect opportunity. The kind that makes Booth think maybe fate is on his side. Maybe this is meant to happen. Maybe history is calling him to this moment. So Lincoln says yes to the theater, and Mary is pleased, and the Grants decline, and Rathbone and Harris accept, and an advertisement runs in the newspaper, and John Wilkes Booth reads that advertisement and begins the final preparations for what he's been planning. All of it feeling perfectly ordinary. Just another evening, just another social obligation, Just another decision in a life full of decisions, the kind of choice you make and immediately forget about because it seems so inconsequential. Except, of course, it wasn't inconsequential at all. It was the choice that put Abraham Lincoln in a specific place at a specific time, directly in the path of a man who'd already decided that place and that time would be perfect for murder. But none of that feels heavy yet. Right now, it's just Thursday evening plans, sorted, nothing more dramatic than that. Until, of course, it becomes the most dramatic thing imaginable. Ford's Theater, Washington's favorite escape room. Ford's Theater sits on 10th Street in Washington, D.C., and in April of 1865, it's exactly the kind of place you'd go if you wanted to forget about the war for a few hours. It's not grand or particularly impressive. It's a modest brick building, 3 stories tall, painted white, with Ford's Athenaeum written above the entrance, because John T. Ford briefly tried to rebrand it as an educational venue before giving up and just letting people watch plays. The building wasn't even originally a theater. It started as the First Baptist Church of Washington, which should tell you something about its architecture. High ceilings, decent acoustics, but fundamentally a box with seats facing a stage. Ford bought it in 1861, converted it into a theater, and then watched it burn down in 1862. Because apparently mid-19th century buildings just did that sometimes. Ford rebuilt it, and the new version opened in August of 1863. This is the theater Lincoln will visit, the one still standing, the one that will become a museum and a memorial and a place tourists visit to stand where history pivoted. The interior is actually quite nice for a mid-sized theater. The main floor has wooden seats arranged in rows, facing a stage framed by a proscenium arch. There are 2 balcony levels, the dress circle, which is the first balcony and generally where wealthier patrons sit, and the family circle above that, which is cheaper and further from the stage. The whole space holds maybe 1,700 people when it's packed, which it often is. The presidential box is on the dress circle level, staged right from the audience's perspective. It's not actually one box, it's 2 boxes, 7 and 8, with the partition between them removed to create a larger space. This happens whenever the president attends, which isn't often, but often enough that the theater has the process down. The box itself is decorated for the occasion. American flags are draped over the railing. There's a framed portrait of George Washington, because apparently every presidential appearance needs a George Washington portrait to make it official. The furniture is nice, but not extravagant. A sofa, some chairs, enough space for 4 people to sit comfortably while watching the stage below. What the presidential box doesn't have, and this becomes extremely relevant very shortly, is good security features. There's one door leading into the box from a narrow hallway. That door opens inward, into the box itself. There's no lock on the door, or if there is, nobody's using it. The hallway leading to the box is accessible to anyone who can get to the dress circle level, which is basically anyone in the theater. Between the main hallway and the presidential box, there's a tiny vestibule with a second door. This outer door is supposed to be guarded, but we'll get to how well that works in a moment. The important thing is that once you're through that outer door, you're basically in the box. There's nothing else stopping you. No Secret Service, because the Secret Service won't be created for another few months and won't start protecting presidents for another 36 years. No security checkpoints, just a door and maybe, if everyone's doing their job, one guard sitting in the hallway. The sight lines from the box are excellent. You can see the entire stage clearly, and more importantly for what's about to happen, the stage can see you. The audience can see you too. You're elevated, prominent, impossible to miss if you know where to look, which is perfect if you're the president and want to be seen enjoying a play, reassuring the nation that everything is calm and normal. It's less perfect if someone with bad intentions wants to know exactly where you'll be sitting, completely visible and essentially unprotected. John Wilkes Booth knows this theater better than almost anyone. He's performed here dozens of times. He knows that during a show, most of the staff is focused on the stage or the audience. He knows the backstage area, the storage rooms, the prop closets. He knows you can access the dress circle from a side staircase without going through the main lobby. He knows the presidential box has that one door, that narrow hallway, that perfect moment of isolation. Ford's theater is, for Booth's purposes, ideal. It's familiar territory, a space he controls through knowledge and experience. It's public enough that his actions will have maximum witness and impact, but configured in a way that gives him a clear approach and, he hopes, a clear escape. The theater is already filling up by the time the presidential party arrives. People are excited. The war is over. They want to laugh. They want to see the president looking happy and relaxed. They want everything to feel normal again, just for one evening. The stage is lit, the audience is settling in, and up in that decorated box on the dress circle level, 4 chairs are waiting, 2 for the Lincolns, 2 for their guests. The sightlines are perfect. The atmosphere is festive. It's the kind of place where absolutely nothing should go wrong, which of course means absolutely everything is about to go spectacularly, horrifyingly wrong. But for now, it's just a theater, just another evening performance, just a building full of people hoping for a few hours of comedy and escape, with no idea that by the time the night ends, this modest brick building on 10th Street will be the most famous crime scene in American history. The comedy playing on stage, let's talk about Our American Cousin, because the play happening on stage when Abraham Lincoln gets shot is so perfectly mediocre and forgettable that it almost feels like the universe playing a cosmic joke. Written by Tom Taylor, a British playwright, Our American Cousin premiered in New York in 1858 and became surprisingly popular despite being, by all accounts, pretty standard mid-19th century comedy. The plot revolves around an American rube named Asa Trenchard who travels to England to claim an inheritance and gets caught up with various British aristocrats who look down on him while secretly being broke themselves. It's all mistaken identities and class comedy and romantic entanglements that resolve neatly by the final act. The star of the production at Ford's Theater is Laura Keene, a genuinely talented actress and theater manager who has been performing this play for years. This is actually her 1000th performance of Our American Cousin, which is either impressive dedication or a sign that she really needs to diversify her repertoire. It's her benefit night, meaning she gets a cut of the ticket sales, so there's extra promotional push to fill the seats. The play is in 3 acts, and by the time Lincoln arrives at the theater around 8:30, Act 1 is already underway. The presidential party enters the box during a scene, and the performance pauses. The orchestra, because this is what you do when the president shows up, strikes up "Hail to the Chief." The audience rises, applauding. Lincoln acknowledges them with a slight bow, looking tired but pleasant, and then everyone settles back down to watch British people make fun of Americans, and Americans make fun of British people. The comedy is gentle, the kind that gets polite chuckles rather than huge laughs. There's a character named Lord Dundreary, played by Harry Hawke, who's basically the comedic relief character in a play that's already a comedy. He has exaggerated sideburns called Dundreary whiskers that became a fashion trend, which tells you everything about 1860s humor. His big shtick is saying silly things in a silly accent while wearing silly facial hair. Lincoln, by most accounts, is enjoying himself. He's leaning back in his rocking chair, the one theater staff brought in specifically for him because apparently regular chairs aren't presidential enough. Mary is sitting beside him. Major Rathbone and Clara Harris are also in the box, positioned slightly behind the Lincolns. Everyone's relaxed. The war is over. This is normal. This is fine. The play moves along. Act 2 happens. Intermission comes and goes. Nobody in the audience is thinking about security or danger or assassinations. They're thinking about the plot of a mediocre comedy and whether they should get refreshments. Act 3 begins. The stage action continues, building toward the play's climax and resolution. And here's where the timing becomes crucial, because John Wilkes Booth has been waiting for a very specific moment in the play. A moment he knows from memory, having seen or performed in enough productions to have the script practically memorized. The line comes late in Act 3. Asa Trenchard, the American character, is alone on stage with Mrs. Mount Chessington, a British dowager. They're having a conversation, and Mrs. Mount Chessington is being condescending about Americans, as is her character's entire purpose. She exits the stage, leaving Asa alone. And then Asa Trenchard delivers the line Booth has been waiting for. "Don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. You sockdologizing old man trap." It's not a particularly funny line by modern standards, or even by 1865 standards, but apparently audiences found it hilarious. Sockdologizing isn't even a real word. It's made-up nonsense meant to sound like frontier American slang. But this line, this specific ridiculous line, gets the biggest laugh of the night. Every single performance, without fail. Booth knows this. He's counting on it. Because when the audience laughs at sockdologizing old man trap, they'll be loud. They'll be distracted. They'll be focused entirely on the stage, not on the presidential box. And that laughter will cover the sound of a gunshot just enough to buy Booth a few precious seconds of confusion. It's almost poetic in a dark way. Abraham Lincoln, one of the most significant figures in American history, will be murdered during a moment of laughter, triggered by a nonsense word in a forgettable play. The last sound he might hear, aside from the gunshot, could be hundreds of people laughing at a joke that isn't even that good. Laura Keene is on stage, performing her 1,000th show. Harry Hawk is delivering his lines with that silly accent and those silly whiskers. The audience is engaged, but not enraptured. It's entertainment, nothing more. Up in the presidential box, Lincoln is watching, maybe smiling at the jokes, maybe thinking about other things. Mary is beside him. The evening is pleasant and unremarkable. And somewhere behind them, in the dim hallway outside the box, John Wilkes Booth is waiting for that one specific word, that moment of laughter, that perfect opportunity to turn a mediocre comedy into the setting for one of history's most shocking tragedies. But the line hasn't been delivered yet. The moment hasn't arrived. For now, it's still just a play and nothing more. The security you wish was better. Let's talk about John Frederick Parker, because understanding how John Wilkes Booth managed to walk into the presidential box and shoot Abraham Lincoln requires understanding the man who was supposed to prevent exactly that from happening. John Parker was a Washington Metropolitan Police officer assigned to protect the president that night. Notice I said officer, singular, because that's how many guards Abraham Lincoln had at Ford's Theater. One. One person standing between the President of the United States and anyone who might want to harm him. One guard. For the man who just led the country through the bloodiest war in American history and had received numerous death threats. Already, you can see where this is going. Parker's record as a police officer was, charitably, inconsistent. He'd been on the force since 1861, and in those 4 years, he'd racked up an impressive list of disciplinary complaints. He'd been charged with using intemperate language to a superior officer, conduct unbecoming an officer, being drunk on duty, sleeping on duty, visiting a house of ill repute while in uniform. This is not a man screaming reliable presidential bodyguard. Somehow, despite this record, Parker ended up assigned to the Metropolitan Police detail responsible for protecting the president. The White House security force was relatively new, created in November of 1864 after persistent security concerns. They needed men, and apparently Parker was warm body who qualified. On April 14th, 1865, Parker was assigned to guard Lincoln at Ford's Theater. His job was straightforward. Sit in the hallway outside the presidential box and make sure nobody unauthorized entered. That's it. Just sit there and guard a door. It's not complicated. Parker arrived at the White House that evening and rode with the presidential party to the theater. So far, so good. He's present, he's sober enough to function, he's where he's supposed to be. When Lincoln entered the presidential box, Parker took up his position in the hallway, sitting on a chair outside the outer door. And then, at some point during the performance, John Parker decided that sitting in a hallway guarding the President of the United States was less interesting than literally anything else. So he left. The exact timeline is unclear, and Parker never gave a full account of his movements that night. Possibly because I abandoned my post to get a drink. Doesn't look great on an official report. But the evidence suggests that during intermission, Parker wandered down to the lobby. Some accounts say he went to a nearby tavern for a drink. Others say he stayed in the theater but moved to a different location where he could actually see the stage, because watching the play from a hallway is apparently too boring, even when you're being paid to protect the president. What's certain is that when John Wilkes Booth approached the presidential box sometime after 10 o'clock, Parker wasn't there. The chair outside the door was empty. The hallway was unguarded. The President of the United States was sitting in a box with one unlocked door and zero security between him and anyone who wanted to walk in. Lincoln's usual informal bodyguard, Ward Hill Lamon, wasn't there either. Lamon had left Washington on assignment, and before leaving, he'd extracted a promise from Lincoln not to attend any public events without proper protection. Lincoln, characteristically, ignored this promise and went to the theater anyway. So we have a situation where the president's most reliable protector is out of town, and the assigned guard has wandered off to do something more interesting than his actual job, leaving the presidential box essentially undefended. Booth would have known Ford's Theater well enough to suspect the security might be minimal, but even he probably didn't expect it to be this easy. No guard in the hallway, no one checking credentials, just an empty chair and an unlocked door between him and his target. After the assassination, there was obviously an investigation. People wanted to know how this happened. How did the President of the United States get shot in a crowded theater while supposedly under protection? The answer, embarrassingly, was that John Parker had decided guarding the president was optional. Parker was never officially charged or disciplined for abandoning his post. The Metropolitan Police records from that period are incomplete, possibly deliberately destroyed to avoid embarrassment. Parker continued working as a police officer until 1868, when he was finally dismissed for sleeping on duty again. Not for failing to protect Lincoln, for falling asleep 3 years later. It's one of those historical details that's almost too absurd to believe. The President of the United States, at one of the most dangerous moments in American history, sitting in a public theater with security so inadequate it might as well have been non-existent, protected by a man who couldn't be bothered to stay at his post for the length of a play. And the consequences of that negligence, that catastrophic failure of duty, were about to unfold in the most horrifying way possible. But John Parker doesn't know that yet. He's somewhere else, not guarding anyone, probably enjoying the evening far more than he should be. And up in the presidential box, Abraham Lincoln is watching a play, completely unaware that the one person supposed to be protecting him has decided that job is someone else's problem. The empty chair in the hallway, the unlocked door, the clear path into the box. Everything John Wilkes Booth could possibly need, handed to him on a silver platter, courtesy of a guard who couldn't be bothered to do his job. Booth's last preparations. So here's John Wilkes Booth, mid-afternoon on April 14th, 1865, learning that Abraham Lincoln will definitely be attending Ford's Theater that evening. And if you could see inside his head at this moment, it's probably equal parts excitement, terror, and the kind of manic determination that makes people do irrevocable things. This isn't the original plan. The original plan was kidnapping, remember? Snatch Lincoln, smuggle him to Richmond, trade him for Confederate prisoners. It was insane, but it was at least theoretically non-fatal. But that plan is dead now, just like the Confederacy it was meant to save. Lee surrendered 5 days ago. There's nothing left to rescue. So Booth has pivoted to Plan B, assassination. Not just Lincoln either. He's convinced a small group of co-conspirators to help him decapitate the entire Union leadership in one coordinated strike. Lincoln will die at the theater. Vice President Andrew Johnson will be killed at his hotel. Secretary of State William Seward will be murdered at his home, all at the same time. Government collapsed, Union leadership destroyed. Something the Confederacy rises again. It's a terrible plan, but Booth is committed. He spends the afternoon making preparations. He's staying at the National Hotel in Washington, a place he knows well and where staff recognize him as a famous actor rather than someone plotting to kill the president. He retrieves his weapons, a single-shot Derringer pistol, small enough to conceal in a pocket, and a large hunting knife with a sharp blade for backup. The Derringer is a Philadelphia Derringer, made by Henry Derringer in Pennsylvania. It's a .44 caliber pistol, maybe 6 inches long, one shot. You load it, fire it once, and then it's just an expensive paperweight until you reload, which takes time Booth knows he won't have. One bullet, one chance. That's it. He also has a knife because Booth is nothing if not theatrical and apparently thinks stabbing might be necessary after shooting someone in the head. The knife is 7 inches long, sharp, designed for hunting, but perfectly functional for murder. He'll end up using it, just not on Lincoln. Booth goes to Ford's Theater that afternoon. He knows the layout, but he wants to check the presidential box, confirm the setup, make sure his plan is feasible. He's friendly with the staff. He's performed here before. Nobody questions why he's wandering around backstage. He examines the box, notes the door, the hallway, the sight lines. He finds a piece of wood, a small board, and places it near the door to the box. Later, he'll use this to jam the outer door shut, buying himself a few extra seconds before anyone can reach him. He also drills a small hole in the door to the box itself. No one notices, or if they do, they don't think it's significant. But this hole will let Booth peer into the box, confirm Lincoln is inside, choose the exact moment to enter. It's a peephole, essentially. Creepy, methodical, and disturbingly well planned. Around 6 p.m, Booth meets with his co-conspirators at a boarding house. Lewis Powell, a former Confederate soldier, will attack Secretary of State Seward. George Atzerodt, a carriage painter, is supposed to kill Vice President Johnson. David Harold will help Powell escape. Booth will handle Lincoln. Atzerodt is already nervous. He signed up for kidnapping, not murder, and he's visibly uncomfortable with the new plan. Booth, intense and insistent, tries to rally them. This is their moment. This is history. This is revenge for the fallen Confederacy. Whatever he says, it's enough to keep the plan moving forward, though Atzerodt will ultimately lose his nerve and fail to even attempt his assignment. Booth eats dinner, or maybe he doesn't. Accounts vary. He might be too wired to eat. He's drinking, probably. Not enough to impair him, but enough to steady the nerves. He's about to murder the President of the United States. That's the kind of thing that requires at least a little whiskey. He retrieves his horse, a fast mare he's arranged to have waiting behind the theater. His escape plan is to shoot Lincoln, drop from the presidential box to the stage, a 12-foot fall, But Booth is an actor and used to stage falls. Shout something dramatic, sprint out the back door, mount his horse, and ride into the night before anyone can react. It's a plan that requires everything to go perfectly, which should tell you something about Booth's mental state, but he's convinced himself this will work. He's convinced himself he's an instrument of fate, a hero avenging the South, someone history will remember with admiration. As evening falls and the theater starts filling with audience members, Booth is backstage, checking his pistol, checking his knife, checking his escape route one more time. He's wearing dark clothing, easy to move in. His boots are polished, his hair is styled. Even committing murder, John Wilkes Booth wants to look good. He knows the play, he knows the laugh line. He knows exactly when to move, when the audience will be distracted, when the sound of a gunshot might blend into the comedy happening on stage. The presidential party arrives late, around 8:30. Booth hears the commotion, the orchestra playing Hail to the Chief, the applause. He knows Lincoln is in the box now. The target is in position. He waits. This part requires patience, and Booth has been waiting for this moment for months, really. So, what's a few more hours? He lurks backstage, or in the alley, or in some dark corner where theater staff won't question his presence. He's a familiar face. He belongs here. Around 10 o'clock, Booth makes his move. The play is in Act 3. The laugh line is coming. Everything is aligned. He walks through the theater like he owns it because, in a way, he does. He's performed here dozens of times. Staff nod at him. No one stops him. Why would they? He's John Wilkes Booth, famous actor, theater regular. He climbs the stairs to the dress circle level. He walks down the hallway toward the presidential box. The chair outside is empty. No guard. No obstacle. Just an unlocked door and the future waiting on the other side, and Booth takes out the wooden board he placed earlier and jams it against the outer door, wedging it shut. Now, even if someone tries to enter from the hallway, they'll be delayed. He has time. He approaches the inner door to the presidential box. He peers through the small hole he drilled earlier. Inside, he can see Lincoln, sitting in his rocking chair watching the stage. Mary is beside him. Rathbone and Harris are slightly behind. Booth takes out the Derringer. One bullet, one shot. On stage, Harry Hawk is delivering his lines, building toward the laugh. Asa Trenchard is about to call Mrs. Mount Chessington a sockdologizing old man trap, and the audience is about to roar with laughter. Booth opens the door quietly and steps inside. 4 people are in the box, but only one is facing away from the door, focused entirely on the stage. Abraham Lincoln has no idea someone just entered the box behind him. He's watching a play, maybe smiling at the comedy, thinking about tomorrow and next week and all the peaceful years ahead. Booth raises the pistol, the laugh line is delivered, the audience roars, and in that moment of noise and distraction, everything changes, slipping into the box. The hallway outside the presidential box is dim, quiet, and most importantly, empty. John Parker, the guard who should be sitting in the chair outside the door, is somewhere else, doing something else, being anywhere except where he's supposed to be. John Wilkes Booth stands in this hallway, and if you could freeze this moment, you'd see a man who's absolutely certain he's about to become the most important person in America. His hand is on the Derringer in his pocket. His breathing is controlled. He's an actor, after all. He knows how to manage stage fright, and what is this if not the performance of his life? The outer door to the presidential box is just ahead. It's not locked. Why would it be? The president has a guard. Except he doesn't, not right now, because John Parker decided his job was optional tonight. Booth moves to the door and tests it gently. It opens. He steps into the tiny vestibule between the outer door and the box itself. This is the space where Parker should be sitting, alert and watchful. Instead, it's empty and silent, illuminated only by the faint glow from the gas lights in the theater below. Booth pulls out the piece of wooden board he prepared earlier. It's roughly shaped, maybe a foot long, designed to fit perfectly between the door and the wall. He wedges it against the door he just entered, jamming it shut. Now, even if someone realizes what's happening and tries to enter from the hallway, they'll be delayed. They'll have to force the door, break through the barricade. It'll buy him precious seconds. The inner door, the one leading directly into the presidential box, is just ahead. Booth approaches it carefully. He's been in this theater hundreds of times, but he's never been in this specific position, standing in this specific spot, about to do this specific thing. He locates the small hole he drilled in the door earlier. It's barely visible, just large enough to peer through. He leans close and looks inside. The view is limited but sufficient. He can see Abraham Lincoln seated in a rocking chair the theater staff brought in specifically for him. The president is turned slightly away from the door, his attention focused on the stage below where Laura Keene and Harry Hawk are performing Our American Cousin. Mary Lincoln sits beside him. Major Henry Rathbone and Clara Harris are positioned slightly behind and to the side. 4 people in the box, 1 target, 3 witnesses who won't realize what's happening until it's too late. Booth reaches into his pocket and retrieves the Derringer. It's small, almost delicate, the kind of weapon a gentleman might carry for personal protection. 1 shot, single action. You pull back the hammer, pull the trigger, and that's it. No second chances, no do-overs. He checks it one more time, even though he's checked it a dozen times already. The pistol is loaded, primed, ready. The percussion cap is in place. 1 bullet, about the diameter of your pinky finger, loaded with black powder and ready to fire. The knife is in his other pocket, easily accessible. He'll need it, though not in the way he originally planned. On stage, the play is approaching the moment Booth has been waiting for. He knows the script. He's seen this play before, maybe performed in it. He knows that Harry Hawk, playing Asa Trenchard, is about to deliver the biggest laugh line of the night. Don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. You sockdologizing old man trap. Absurd. Nonsensical. Guaranteed to make the audience roar with laughter. And in that roar, Booth will move. He places his hand on the door handle. The metal is cool, solid. Inside the box, Lincoln shifts slightly in his chair, leaning forward to see the stage better. Mary laughs at something on stage. Rathbone and Harris are watching the performance, relaxed and unsuspecting. Booth waits. Timing is everything. He's an actor. He understands rhythm, pacing, the perfect moment to make an entrance. On stage, the scene builds. Mrs. Mount Chessington exits. Asa Trenchard is alone. The line is coming. Booth takes a breath. His hand is steady. The Derringer is ready. The door is unlocked, unjammed, waiting to open. The laugh line lands. Sockdologizing old man trap. The audience explodes with laughter. 1,700 people laughing at once, the sound filling the theater, drowning out everything else. Booth opens the door. The hinges are well oiled, silent. The door swings inward smoothly. Booth steps into the presidential box, crossing from the hallway into the small, decorated space where Abraham Lincoln sits watching a play. 4 people in the box. Only one of them might glance toward the door, and that's Major Rathbone, who's sitting where he can see the entrance if he happens to look that way. But Rathbone is watching the stage, distracted by the comedy, not expecting danger in a theater full of celebrating Americans. Booth moves quickly but not frantically. He's done theatrical entrances before. This is just another one, except instead of delivering lines, he's delivering death. Lincoln is maybe 6 feet away, sitting in that rocking chair, his tall frame slightly hunched forward, his attention completely absorbed by the stage. The back of his head is perfectly visible, unprotected, an impossible target to miss at this range. Booth raises the derringer. He's right-handed, so he extends his arm, aiming at a point just behind Lincoln's left ear. The distance is less than 3 feet now. You couldn't miss this shot if you tried. The audience is still laughing. The stage is bright with gaslights. The theater is warm with bodies and breath and the collective sound of people enjoying themselves. Abraham Lincoln has no idea someone just entered the box behind him. He's watching a play. He's tired but content. The war is over. His son is safe. Tomorrow he'll wake up and continue the work of rebuilding a shattered nation. Except there won't be a tomorrow. Not for him. Booth's finger is on the trigger. The hammer is pulled back. The percussion cap is aligned with the powder charge. One squeeze, one spark, one explosion, and everything changes. The laughter is already starting to fade as the next line of dialogue begins. Booth has maybe 2 seconds before the noise dies down, and a gunshot becomes obvious rather than ambiguous. He fires. The fatal shot, the derringer, discharges at approximately 10:15 p.m., April 14th, 1865, sending a lead ball roughly .44 inches in diameter through the back of Abraham Lincoln's skull. The sound is loud, but not as loud as you might expect. A derringer is a small pistol, and the single-shot report blends partially into the tail end of the audience's laughter and the ongoing performance. Some people in the theater hear it clearly and recognize it as a gunshot. Others think it's part of the play, a sound effect, something theatrical that they don't quite understand. The bullet enters Lincoln's head behind his left ear, traveling at several hundred feet per second. It passes through his skull, through his brain, and lodges behind his right eye, where it will remain for the rest of his life, which at this point is measured in hours rather than years. Lincoln doesn't scream. He doesn't grab his head or cry out or do any of the dramatic things you might see in a movie. The bullet severs his motor cortex almost instantly. His body goes limp. His head drops forward. His eyes close. Mary Lincoln, sitting beside him, doesn't immediately understand what happened. She hears the gunshot, or thinks she hears something, and turns toward her husband. He's slumped forward. Is he sleeping? Did he faint? She reaches for him, confused, not yet terrified. Major Henry Rathbone, sitting behind the Lincolns, reacts faster. He sees the flash of the pistol, sees Lincoln collapse, sees a man in dark clothing standing in the box holding a smoking gun. Rathbone is a military officer, trained for combat, and his instinct is immediate. Stop the threat. He lunges toward Booth, reaching for him, trying to grab his arm or tackle him or do anything to prevent escape. But Booth is ready for this. He drops the now useless derringer and pulls out the knife with his other hand. The knife has a 7-inch blade, sharp and designed for hunting. Booth swings it at Rathbone, slashing rather than stabbing, aiming for anything he can reach. The blade cuts deep into Rathbone's left arm, from shoulder to elbow, a wound so severe it nearly severs the muscle and leaves Rathbone's arm functionally useless. Rathbone screams and stumbles backward. Blood is pouring from his arm, soaking his uniform. He tries to maintain his grip on Booth, but can't. The pain is too intense, the wound too severe. Clara Harris, sitting beside Rathbone, is screaming. Mary Lincoln is screaming. The presidential box is suddenly full of noise and chaos and the smell of gunpowder and blood. Booth moves toward the front of the box, toward the railing overlooking the stage 12 feet below. This is the escape route. He's planned this. He's an actor, used to stage falls, confident he can drop to the stage and sprint out the back door before anyone can stop him. He climbs onto the railing, one leg over, preparing to jump. But something goes wrong. The Treasury flag draped over the railing catches his spur. Or maybe he misjudges the distance. Or maybe 12 feet is further than he anticipated. Especially when you're leaping from a narrow railing while holding a bloody knife. Booth jumps, but the landing is bad. He hits the stage awkwardly, his left leg folding beneath him. There's a snap, A crack, the sound of bone breaking. His fibula, the smaller bone in his lower leg, fractures just above the ankle. The pain must be excruciating, but Booth doesn't stop. He can't stop. He stands, or tries to stand, putting weight on the broken leg and forcing himself upright through sheer adrenaline and desperation. Harry Hawk is on stage, alone, mid-scene. He hears the gunshot, sees a man drop from the presidential box to the stage, sees the knife, sees the wild expression. He has no idea what's happening, but he knows it's wrong, it's dangerous, and he needs to get away. He runs into the wings, abandoning the performance. Booth is standing on stage now, facing an audience of 1,700 people who are mostly confused, some starting to realize something terrible has happened, others still thinking this is part of the show. And because John Wilkes Booth is an actor who can't help himself even in the middle of fleeing a murder scene, he turns to the audience and shouts something. The exact words are disputed. Some witnesses claim he shouted Sic Semper Tyrannis, Latin for thus always to tyrants, the Virginia state motto and a phrase famously associated with the assassination of Julius Caesar. Others remember him shouting, "The South is avenged," or "Revenge for the South." Maybe he shouted both. Maybe he shouted neither. Maybe the words were lost in the chaos. But the witnesses who remember hearing him speak remember the passion, the theatricality, the sense that even covered in blood with a broken leg, Booth was performing. He limps across the stage, moving faster than should be possible on a fractured fibula, driven by panic and adrenaline. He reaches the back of the stage, the door leading to the alley where his horse is waiting. He's still holding the knife, still moving, still convinced he can escape. Behind him, in the presidential box, Abraham Lincoln sits motionless, his head tilted forward, blood seeping from the wound behind his ear. Mary is screaming, clutching at him, trying to wake him up. Rathbone is trying to help despite his severed arm, blood everywhere. Claire Harris is screaming for a doctor. The audience is starting to understand. Voices rising, panic spreading. Someone shouts, "The president has been shot." The theater erupts into chaos. On stage, Booth reaches the back door and throws it open. The alley is dark, narrow. His horse is there, held by Joseph Burroughs, a theater employee Booth paid to watch the animal. Booth shoves past him, grabs the reins, and hauls himself onto the horse despite the broken leg screaming in protest. He kicks the horse into motion. The animal surges forward, carrying Booth into the Washington night, away from Ford's theater, away from the screaming and the chaos and the man dying in the presidential box. Inside the theater, someone finally reaches Lincoln. A doctor, Charles Leal, was in the audience. He climbs into the presidential box, pushing through the crowd. He examines Lincoln, finds the wound, realizes immediately how bad it is. The bullet is lodged in Lincoln's brain. The wound is mortal. There's nothing Leal can do except try to make the president comfortable and maybe, if they're lucky, keep him alive for a few more hours. Lincoln is still breathing, but barely. His pulse is weak. His eyes are closed. He's unconscious and will never wake up again. On 10th Street, outside Ford's Theater, John Wilkes Booth rides into the night. His leg broken, his plan half completed, his name about to become the most infamous in American history. And in the presidential box, surrounded by blood and screaming and the shattered remnants of a peaceful evening, Abraham Lincoln begins the slow process of dying. Mary Lincoln's terrifying realization. Mary Todd Lincoln is sitting maybe 2 feet from her husband when the gunshot happens, and for the first second or so, she doesn't understand what just occurred. There's a sound, loud but muffled by the audience noise and the ongoing performance. Abraham slumps forward in his rocking chair, his head dropping, his body going limp. She turns toward him, confused. Is he sleeping? Did he faint? The man has been exhausted for 4 years straight, so fainting doesn't seem entirely unreasonable. She reaches for him, touching his shoulder. "What is it, Abraham?" or something like that. The exact words are lost to history, but the sentiment is captured in witness accounts. She's trying to wake him up, gently at first, then more urgently as she realizes he's not responding. And then she sees the blood. It's seeping from behind his left ear, dark and wet, staining his collar. Her hand comes away red. That's when the confusion transforms into something else entirely. Terror. The kind of raw, primal understanding that something irreversible has just happened. Mary starts screaming. Not words, just sound. The kind of screaming that makes everyone within earshot freeze because it's so clearly the sound of someone's world ending. Major Rathbone is struggling with Booth, getting his arm slashed open. Clara Harris is trying to help. The presidential box is suddenly chaos, blood, gunpowder smoke, and Mary's screams cutting through everything else. She's grabbing at Abraham, trying to hold him upright, trying to make him wake up, trying to reverse time through sheer force of will. He's still breathing, technically, but it's shallow and irregular. His eyes are closed. He's not conscious. He's never going to be conscious again, though Mary doesn't know that yet. People are rushing into the box now. The wooden barricade Booth wedged against the door has been forced open. Strangers are climbing in, trying to help, asking what happened. Mary is beyond answering questions. She's holding her husband, the man she married 23 years ago, the man she fought with and laughed with and raised children with, and he's dying. Right there, right now. In a theater during a comedy on what was supposed to be a peaceful evening celebrating the end of a war. Someone, probably Rathbone despite his severed arm, shouts for a doctor. Actually, multiple people shout for a doctor. It's a theater with 1,700 people. There have to be doctors in the audience. And there are. Multiple physicians start making their way toward the presidential box. The first to reach Lincoln is Charles Leal, a young Army surgeon who was sitting in the dress circle. He's 23 years old, barely out of medical school, and he's about to examine the President of the United States with a fatal head wound. He climbs into the box, pushes through the crowd, and immediately takes charge because someone needs to and everyone else is panicking. Leal examines Lincoln quickly. He checks for a pulse, finds it weak. Checks for breathing, finds it shallow. Searches for the wound, finds blood matted in Lincoln's hair behind his left ear. He probes the wound gently with his finger, something that would horrify modern medical professionals but was standard practice in 1865. His finger goes maybe 3 inches into Lincoln's skull before hitting the bullet lodged in his brain. Leal knows immediately this is mortal. The president is dying. There's no surgery that can fix this, no treatment that will reverse the damage. The bullet has torn through his brain, and in 1865, that's a death sentence that just hasn't finished executing yet. But Leal doesn't say this out loud, not yet. Mary is right there, still screaming, still holding Abraham. He focuses on trying to keep Lincoln alive, maybe long enough to get him somewhere more private than a theater box where hundreds of people are watching. Mary is beyond consolation. Her husband is dying in her arms. This is the second time she's watched someone she loves die. Her son Willie died 3 years ago in the White House, and she never really recovered from that grief. Now Abraham. Now this. The theater around them is pandemonium, but in the presidential box, time feels suspended. Just Mary holding Abraham. Doctors working desperately, blood everywhere, and the slow, terrible understanding that nothing they do will matter. And somewhere outside, riding into the Washington night, is the man responsible for all of it. Booth's escape and the famous leap. So John Wilkes Booth just shot the president in the head, stabbed a Union officer, and now he's standing on the railing of the presidential box preparing to jump 12 feet down to the stage because Apparently, murdering someone wasn't dramatic enough without adding an acrobatic element. This is peak Booth behavior, honestly. He could have just run out the door like a normal assassin, walk out of the box, down the stairs, out of the theater, onto his waiting horse. Simple, efficient, boring. But Booth is an actor, and actors don't do boring exits. They do grand gestures. They do theatrical flourishes. They do things that guarantee everyone in the room will remember exactly what they saw. So he jumps. The presidential box is on the dress circle level, elevated above the stage. The drop is approximately 12 feet, which doesn't sound like much until you're actually standing on a narrow railing holding a bloody knife while wearing riding boots with spurs. Then 12 feet becomes considerably more intimidating. Booth vaults over the railing, aiming for the stage below. For a brief moment, he's airborne, coat billowing, knife in hand, probably feeling like this is the most important moment of his life. Which it is, just not in the way he thinks. The landing is where things go wrong. His spur catches on the Treasury Guard flag draped over the railing, or maybe it's just the awkwardness of the jump. Or maybe 12 feet is genuinely too far to drop gracefully while holding a weapon. Whatever the reason, Booth doesn't land cleanly. He hits the stage hard, his left leg folding beneath him. There's a crack that some people in the front rows claim they heard over the chaos. His fibula, the smaller bone in his lower leg, snaps just above the ankle. It's not a compound fracture, meaning the bone doesn't break through the skin, but it's definitely broken. The pain must be incredible. A fractured fibula is agonizing even when you're lying still in a hospital bed. Booth just broke his and needs to run across a stage, exit a theater, mount a horse, and ride into the night. The adrenaline must be doing some seriously heavy lifting right now. He stands up. Somehow. Putting weight on a broken leg. Forcing himself upright through sheer panic and determination. Harry Hawk, the actor who was performing on stage when Booth landed, takes one look at this wild-eyed man with a knife and a broken leg and decides this is absolutely not in his contract. He sprints into the wings. Booth is alone on stage now, facing an audience that's just starting to understand something terrible has happened. And because he's John Wilkes Booth and cannot help himself, he delivers a line. "Sic semper tyrannis," he shouts, which is Latin for "thus always to tyrants." It's the Virginia state motto and what Brutus supposedly said when stabbing Julius Caesar, because Booth is nothing if not committed to the historical drama angle. Some witnesses remember him shouting, "The South is avenged." Others don't remember any words at all. Just the image of a man stumbling across the stage, trailing blood and chaos. Memory is funny that way, especially during traumatic events. What everyone agrees on is that Booth moved fast. Broken leg or not, he crosses the stage quickly, limping but driven by the knowledge that 1,700 people and multiple doctors are about to realize the president has been shot and someone needs to pay for it. He reaches the back door, the one leading to the alley behind the theater. He throws it open and stumbles outside into the Washington night. His horse is there, held by Edmund Spangler or Joseph Burroughs, depending on which account you trust. Booth grabs the reins, hauls himself into the saddle despite the broken leg screaming in protest, and kicks the horse into motion. The horse surges forward, carrying Booth away from Ford's Theater, away from the crime scene, away from Abraham Lincoln bleeding in the presidential box above. Booth is riding hard, broken leg dangling, convinced he's just struck a blow for Southern liberty that will make him a hero. He's wrong, of course, but he won't fully understand how wrong for another 12 days, and by then it'll be far too late to matter. Behind him, the theater erupts into complete chaos, and the manhunt for America's most wanted man is about to begin. Ford's Theater goes from celebratory to catastrophic in about 3 seconds, which is roughly how long it takes for the audience to process that the president has been shot, and this is not, in fact, part of the performance. The initial reaction is confusion. Someone in the presidential box is screaming. A man just jumped from the box to the stage and limped away shouting Latin. Harry Hawk, who was performing, has fled into the wings. The play has stopped. Something is wrong, but what exactly? Then someone, probably multiple someones, shouts the words that crystallize the chaos. The president has been shot. That's when 1,700 people simultaneously realize they're in a theater where an assassination just occurred, and their collective response is exactly what you'd expect. Panic, screaming, people standing up, sitting down, trying to leave, trying to get to the presidential box to help, trying to understand what's happening. The orchestra has stopped playing. The stage lights are still burning, casting everything in that weird theatrical glow that makes the moment feel unreal. Gas lamps flicker. The smell of gunpowder hangs in the air, mixing with the sweat and perfume of a crowded theater. Some people try to chase Booth. They see him exit through the back door and attempt to follow, but he's already on his horse by the time anyone reaches the alley. A few shots are fired after him, but they miss. Booth disappears into the Washington night, and the people who tried to stop him return to the theater, frustrated and empty-handed. Up in the presidential box, doctors are arriving. Charles Lyell is already there, examining Lincoln, and now he's joined by Charles Taft and Albert King, two more physicians who were in the audience, three doctors, all frantically trying to save a man they know is probably beyond saving. Mary Lincoln is still screaming. Clara Harris is trying to comfort her while also dealing with the fact that her fiancé, Major Rathbone, has a massive knife wound in his arm and is bleeding everywhere. The box is crowded with people trying to help and people just trying to see what happened. Leale makes a decision. Lincoln cannot stay here, the theater is chaos, the crowd is pressing in, and the president needs somewhere quieter, somewhere more dignified than a theater box to die. Because Leale knows Lincoln is dying, even if he hasn't said it out loud yet. They need to move him. But where? Back to the White House is too far. Lincoln might not survive the carriage ride through Washington streets, and besides, the bumping and jostling could make things worse. They need somewhere close. Someone suggests the house across the street, the Peterson House, a boarding house at number 516 10th Street, maybe 100 feet from Ford's Theater. It's close, it's quiet, it has beds. It'll work. The decision is made. They'll carry Lincoln across the street to the Peterson House. But first, they need to move him from the box to the theater floor, which requires navigating narrow stairs while carrying a 6'4" man who's unconscious and dead weight. Several men volunteer to help. Soldiers, civilians, theater employees, anyone strong enough to lift. They carefully maneuver Lincoln out of the box, through the narrow doorway that Booth entered less than 10 minutes ago, down the stairs to the main floor of the theater. The crowd parts for them. 1,700 people pressing against walls and seats to make room for the procession carrying their president. Some are crying. Some are praying. Some are still trying to understand what just happened and why. Outside Ford's Theater, 10th Street is filling with people. Word spreads fast in a city this size. The president has been shot. He's dying. He's being moved across the street. Crowds gather, silent and shocked, watching the slow procession. And somewhere in the distance, church bells start ringing, not in celebration, but in mourning, announcing to Washington that something terrible has happened and the peaceful evening everyone was enjoying is well and truly over. The Midnight Doctors, William Peterson's boarding house at number 516 10th Street, is about to become the most famous address in America, and William Peterson himself has no say in the matter. He's asleep when someone starts pounding on his door around 10:30 at night, demanding entry because the president has been shot and needs a place to die. You don't really say no to that request. The men carrying Abraham Lincoln navigate the front steps, through the narrow hallway, past the parlor, toward the back bedroom on the first floor. It's a small room, maybe 9 feet by 17 feet, rented by a War Department clerk named William Clark, who also has no say in his bedroom becoming presidential deathbed. The room has a bed, but it's not big enough for Lincoln. He's 6 feet 4 inches tall, and the bed is a standard size for 1865, which means it's barely 6 feet long. They lay him diagonally across the mattress, his long frame awkwardly positioned because there's no other way to make him fit. Dr. Charles Lyell is still in charge, though he is now joined by several other physicians, including the Surgeon General Joseph Barnes, who arrives shortly after Lincoln is settled. Barnes outranks Lyell professionally, but Lyell was first on scene, first to examine the wound, first to understand how bad this is. He stays close, monitoring Lincoln's breathing and pulse. The examination by lamplight is methodical and grim. They remove Lincoln's clothes, checking for other wounds in case Booth shot him more than once or the knife caused additional damage. There's nothing else, just the single bullet wound behind his left ear, small and neat on the outside, catastrophic on the inside. Barnes probes the wound, following the bullet's path through Lincoln's skull. His finger traces the trajectory, entering behind the left ear, traveling forward and slightly upward, lodging behind the right eye. The bullet has torn through the left side of Lincoln's brain, destroying tissue and causing massive internal bleeding. In 1865, there's no surgery that can fix this. No way to remove the bullet safely. No treatment that will reverse brain damage. All the doctors can do is keep Lincoln comfortable, monitor his vital signs, and wait. They clean the wound. They check his pulse every 15 minutes. They note his breathing pattern, which is slow and irregular. Sometimes he stops breathing for 30 seconds or more before gasping and resuming. It's called Cheney-Stokes respiration, a pattern associated with severe brain injury and impending death. Lincoln's eyes are swollen shut from internal bleeding. His face is pale. His pulse is weak but steady. He's alive in the technical sense, but he's not there. The man who was Abraham Lincoln, who thought and spoke and led a nation through civil war, is already gone. What's left is just a body slowly shutting down. The doctors confer quietly. Barnes asks Lyell's opinion. Lyell is direct. The wound is mortal. The president will not recover. Death is certain. The only question is when. Could be hours, could be longer. But the outcome is inevitable. They don't tell Mary this directly, not yet. She's in the front parlor, surrounded by friends and officials, alternating between grief and hope. She keeps asking to see Abraham, and occasionally they let her into the bedroom where she sits beside him, holding his hand, talking to him even though he can't hear her. More doctors arrive as the night progresses. Eventually, there are 16 physicians in the Peterson house, though most of them have nothing to do except wait. Lincoln is beyond medical intervention. The doctors who were first on scene have done everything possible, which is essentially nothing. The bedroom is crowded, hot, stuffy. Gas lamps burn, providing light, but also heat and the smell of burning oil. The air is thick with tension and the unspoken knowledge that everyone in this room is witnessing history, though not the kind anyone wants to witness. Lincoln lies diagonally across the bed, his chest rising and falling irregularly, blood slowly seeping from the wound onto the white pillowcase beneath his head. His hands are folded across his chest. His face is peaceful, almost serene, completely unaware of the vigil happening around him. And in the front parlor, cabinet members are gathering, preparing for the long night ahead and the constitutional crisis that will follow when the 16th President of the United States finally stops breathing. Carrying Lincoln across the street, the procession from Ford's Theater to the Peterson House is maybe 100 feet, which doesn't sound like much until you're carrying an unconscious 6'4" man through a crowd of panicking Washingtonians on a chilly April night. It's around 10:30 when they start moving Lincoln. Dr. Lyell supports the president's head, trying to keep it stable and minimize the bleeding. Several soldiers and civilians support his body, lifting him carefully. They navigate the narrow stairs from the dress circle to the main floor of the theater, moving slowly, trying not to jostle him too much. The theater audience has mostly cleared out by now, flooding into 10th Street and spreading word of what happened. The president has been shot. He's dying. Booth escaped. The information spreads through Washington like fire through dry grass, and within minutes, hundreds of people are converging on Ford's theater. Outside, the street is mud and chaos. It rained earlier in the day, and 10th Street is a mess of puddles and boot prints. The gas street lamps provide minimal light. The crowd presses close, trying to see, trying to help, trying to understand. The men carrying Lincoln move through this crowd carefully. Leala keeps one hand on Lincoln's wound, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. It doesn't really help. The damage is internal, the bleeding mostly inside his skull where pressure and bandages can't reach. But Leale is a doctor, and doctors do something even when there's nothing to be done. Someone in the crowd shouts, "Take him to the White House." Leale considers this briefly. The White House is maybe a mile away, maybe 10 minutes by carriage, but Lincoln might not survive 10 minutes of bumpy carriage ride over Washington's notoriously bad streets. They need somewhere closer. "Is there a house nearby where we can take the president?" Leale calls out. Several people respond, pointing toward the Peterson house directly across the street. A man is standing on the front steps, Henry Safford, a War Department clerk who boards there. He's holding a lantern and gesturing them forward. "Bring him in here," he shouts. The decision is made. They cross 10th Street, navigating mud and puddles, the crowd parting ahead of them. Lincoln is completely limp, dead weight, his long frame awkward to carry. The men struggle up the front steps of the Peterson house, through the narrow doorway, into the front hall. William Peterson, the owner, appears in his nightshirt. He's just been woken by the commotion and has no idea what's happening until someone explains. The president has been shot. He needs a bed. Peterson, to his credit, doesn't hesitate. "Take him to the back bedroom," he says. They move through the hall, past the parlor, toward the first-floor bedroom at the rear of the house. It's a small room, sparsely furnished. A bed, a dresser, a couple chairs. The bed is narrow and short. They lay Lincoln on it diagonally, his feet hanging off one corner, his head on the pillow in the opposite corner. It's the only way he fits. The procession that carried him here disperses into the house. Some men stay in the bedroom to help the doctors. Others move to the parlor, sitting heavily in chairs, processing what just happened. Someone sends runners to alert government officials. Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, needs to know. Vice President Andrew Johnson needs to know. Everyone needs to know. Mary Lincoln is helped from the theater to the Peterson house shortly after Abraham. She's barely coherent, oscillating between grief and denial. Clara Harris stays with her, trying to provide comfort. They settle Mary in the front parlor, where she can't see the bedroom, can't see the doctors working, can't see how bad things really are. Outside, the crowd continues to grow. 10th Street is packed now, hundreds of people standing in silent vigil. Some are crying, some are praying, some are just standing there, shocked, unable to process that the president who led them through 4 years of war is dying in a boarding house bedroom because an actor decided to play hero. More officials arrive: senators, congressmen, cabinet members, military officers. They fill the Peterson house, cramming into the small parlor, asking questions no one can answer. Is he alive? Will he survive? Who did this? Where's Booth? In the back bedroom, Lincoln lies motionless, his breathing shallow and irregular. Blood seeps slowly from the wound behind his ear. The doctors monitor his pulse, his respiration, his temperature. They know he's dying, but they don't know when. And so begins the longest night in American history. with a nation's leader unconscious in a borrowed bed while Washington holds its breath and waits for morning. The vigil in the Peterson House. The Peterson House was not designed for what's about to happen to it. It's a modest 3-story boarding house, home to working class clerks and government employees, the kind of place where you rent a room for $8 a month and share a bathroom. Now it's about to host the death of a president and the emergency command center for government in crisis. The back bedroom where Lincoln lies is approximately 9 feet by 17 feet. In that space, you have Lincoln on the bed, at least 3 doctors at any given time, plus cabinet members rotating in and out to check on him. The room is stuffy, hot from body heat and gas lamps, the air thick with the smell of blood and lamp oil, and too many people breathing in too small a space. Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, arrives shortly after 11. He takes one look at Lincoln, gets a grim assessment from the doctors, and immediately shifts into crisis management mode. If Lincoln dies, which seems increasingly certain, someone needs to make sure the government continues functioning and the assassins don't get away. Stanton sets up command in the back parlor, commandeering a table and demanding paper, pen, and messengers. He starts issuing orders. Lock down Washington, close the bridges, stop all outgoing trains, send telegrams to every city and military post. John Wilkes Booth is wanted for assassination. Large reward for his capture. No one leaves the capital until the conspirators are found. More officials arrive throughout the night. Vice President Andrew Johnson shows up, takes one look at the dying president, and leaves quickly because what exactly is he supposed to do? If Lincoln dies, Johnson becomes president, which is a constitutional transfer of power he's not remotely prepared for. He returns to his hotel to wait and probably panic. Secretary of State William Seward is not present because he's in his own bed, recovering from his own assassination attempt. Lewis Powell, one of Booth's co-conspirators, attacked Seward at his home around the same time Booth shot Lincoln. Powell broke into Seward's house and stabbed him multiple times before being fought off by Seward's sons, and a soldier assigned to guard him. Seward survived, badly wounded, but alive. The conspiracy extended beyond just Lincoln, but only Booth succeeded in killing his target. In the front parlor, Mary Lincoln sits surrounded by friends and officials. She's allowed to visit the bedroom occasionally, sitting beside Abraham, holding his hand, speaking to him even though he's unconscious and unhearing. Each time she has to be led away when her grief becomes too overwhelming. The bedroom is not big enough for her grief, and the doctors and the officials all crowded around. Robert Lincoln, the president's oldest son, arrives sometime after midnight. He's 21, recently returned from serving with Grant's army. He stands beside his father's bed, watching him die slowly, and maintains a stoic composure that will eventually earn him a reputation as emotionally reserved. But tonight, in this cramped bedroom with his father bleeding and unconscious, he's just a young man watching someone he loves slip away. The hours crawl by. Midnight passes. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Lincoln is still breathing, still hanging on with a stubbornness that characterized his entire political career. His pulse weakens gradually. His breathing becomes more irregular. The doctors continue monitoring, recording vital signs every 15 minutes, watching a slow decline that seems inevitable but refuses to actually arrive. Messengers run in and out of the house all night, bringing updates and carrying orders. Booth has been identified. Rewards have been posted. The military is mobilizing. The conspiracy is bigger than just one man. There were coordinated attacks. Seward was stabbed but survived. Vice President Johnson was targeted, but his assigned assassin lost his nerve. The news spreads through Washington, then beyond. Telegraph operators send messages to every major city. Newspapers set special editions. By morning, the entire nation will know that Abraham Lincoln is dying and John Wilkes Booth is responsible. In the bedroom, cabinet members take turns sitting with Lincoln. Gideon Welles, Secretary of the Navy, sits beside the bed for long stretches, just watching. Charles Sumner, a senator and Lincoln's friend, holds his hand at one point, crying openly. These are powerful men accustomed to controlling events, and all they can do is watch and wait. Around 3 a.m., Lincoln's breathing becomes more labored. The doctors note the change. His pulse is weakening further. The intervals between breaths are getting longer. The end is approaching finally, after hours of this agonizing vigil. Stanton continues working in the back parlor, writing orders, conducting interviews, building the case against the conspirators. He's grieving, probably, but he's also the kind of man who processes grief by working, by doing something productive when everything feels helpless. Outside, the crowd has never dispersed. Hundreds of people stand in 10th Street, silent, waiting. Some have been there for hours. No one wants to leave. They're witnessing history, bearing witness to a president's death, standing vigil for a man who led them through the worst crisis the nation ever faced. And inside the boarding house, in that cramped back bedroom, Abraham Lincoln continues the slow process of dying. Lincoln's final moments. The night has been long, but morning is approaching, and with it, the end of Abraham Lincoln's life. It's around 6:30 a.m. on April 15th, 1865. The sky outside is beginning to lighten. The gas lamps in the Peterson House bedroom are still burning. Their light no longer necessary, but no one has thought to extinguish them. Lincoln has been unconscious for over 8 hours. His breathing has been growing progressively more labored, the intervals between breaths stretching longer. The doctors know this pattern. They've seen it before in patients with mortal head wounds. This is the body's final process, the slow shutdown of vital systems. In the bedroom, a small group has gathered for these final moments. Dr. Barnes, the Surgeon General, is monitoring Lincoln's pulse. Dr. Leale, who was first on the scene, is still there, having stayed through the entire night. Robert Lincoln stands near the foot of the bed, composed but devastated. Edwin Stanton is present, along with several other cabinet members and officials. Mary Lincoln is in the front parlor, having been gently discouraged from being in the room for the final moments. She's distraught beyond consolation, and the doctors worry she'll become too emotional. It's a decision made with good intentions, but one that means she's not physically present when her husband of 23 years takes his last breath. Around 7 a.m., Lincoln's breathing becomes extremely irregular. Long pauses between each breath. His pulse is barely detectable. His face is swollen, his eyes closed, his body completely still except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. The doctors lean closer, watching for signs. Stanton stands nearby, his expression grim. Robert Lincoln holds his father's hand. The room is completely silent except for Lincoln's faint, struggling breaths. At 7:21 a.m., Abraham Lincoln takes his last breath. It's not dramatic. There's no final word, no moment of clarity, no theatrical departure. He simply stops breathing. His chest stops moving. His pulse stops beating. The 16th President of the United States is dead. Dr. Barnes checks for a heartbeat, finds nothing. He looks at the other physicians, who nod confirmation. Barnes looks at his pocket watch. The president died at 21 minutes past 7, he says quietly. For a moment, no one moves. No one speaks. They're all just standing there, witnesses to the moment Abraham Lincoln became history instead of a living man. Then Stanton, the gruff Secretary of War who spent the entire night managing the crisis, coordinating the manhunt, holding the government together, says something. The exact words are disputed by witnesses who were there. Some claim he said, "Now he belongs to the ages." Others remember it as, "Now he belongs to the angels." The difference is one word, one letter, but it changes the meaning subtly. Ages suggests Lincoln's place in history, his transformation from mortal man to eternal symbol. Angels is more religious, more peaceful. suggesting his soul's journey. Both fit the moment. Both capture something true. History has generally preferred ages, and that's the version that endured. Stanton's words hang in the air. Then someone needs to tell Mary. This becomes Robert's responsibility. He walks to the front parlor where his mother has been waiting, surrounded by friends and officials. "Mother," he says, and he doesn't need to finish the sentence. Mary understands immediately. Her grief is immediate and overwhelming. The sounds she makes are described by witnesses as almost inhuman, the kind of primal mourning that makes everyone uncomfortable because it's too raw, too real. She's just lost her husband. She lost her son Willie 3 years ago. Her grief is compounded, layered, impossible to process. Outside, word spreads quickly. The crowd that's been standing vigil in 10th Street for hours learns that the president is dead. Some people cry, some pray. Some just stand there, shocked, trying to process that the man who saved the Union is gone. Church bells start ringing across Washington, then across the nation as the news spreads by telegraph. Slow, mournful tolls announcing Lincoln's death. Flags drop to half-staff. Businesses close. The entire country enters mourning. In the bedroom of the Peterson house, doctors prepare Lincoln's body. They straighten his limbs, close his eyes, clean the blood from his face. The man who was 6'4" and ungainly in life looks strangely peaceful in death, his face relaxed, the years of war and stress erased. The body will be moved back to the White House for the funeral preparations. Mary will never enter that boarding house bedroom again. Neither will most of the people present for these final hours. The room will become a memorial, a place tourists visit, the spot where American history pivoted. But right now, it's just a small, crowded bedroom where a president died while a nation held its breath, and the long, terrible night finally ended with the morning. The great manhunt begins. Edwin Stanton hasn't slept. He's been awake since receiving word of the assassination around 10:30 the previous night. And he's spent those hours transforming the Peterson house back parlor into a command center for what will become the largest manhunt in American history. By the time Lincoln dies at 7:21 a.m., Stanton has already set the machinery in motion. Telegrams have been sent to every major city, military post, and police department in the country. The message is clear. John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Lincoln. He's armed, dangerous, and running. Find him. Bring him back. Preferably alive, but dead is acceptable. The reward poster goes up within hours. $50,000 for Booth's capture, $25,000 for his accomplices. That's roughly equivalent to over $1 million in modern money. It's the kind of reward that turns every farmer, shopkeeper, and bounty hunter into a potential detective. Washington itself is on lockdown. All bridges leading out of the city are closed and guarded. Trains are stopped and searched. Anyone leaving the capital has to provide identification and explanation. The city has become a cage, and the assumption is that Booth is still trapped inside. Except Booth isn't in Washington anymore. While everyone at Ford's Theater was focused on saving Lincoln or processing the chaos, Booth rode out of the city across the Navy Yard Bridge, headed into Maryland. The soldier guarding the bridge, Sergeant Silas Cobb, stopped Booth briefly and asked his name and business. Booth gave his real name, said he was heading home to Charles County, and Cobb let him pass. This will haunt Cobb for the rest of his life. He let the president's assassin cross the bridge and escape into Maryland. And he did it less than an hour after the assassination. To be fair, Cobb didn't know about the shooting yet. News traveled slowly in 1865, but history isn't particularly interested in fairness when it comes to these kinds of mistakes. By morning, investigators have pieced together the basic conspiracy. Booth didn't act alone. There were coordinated attacks on Lincoln, Seward, and potentially Johnson. They have names: Lewis Powell, who attacked Seward; George Atzerodt, who was supposed to kill Johnson but chickened out; David Harold, who helped Powell escape; Mary Surratt, who ran the boarding house where the conspirators met; The dragnet expands rapidly. Federal troops, police, and private detectives fan out across Washington, Maryland, and Virginia. They're searching houses, questioning witnesses, following leads both credible and absurd. Everyone who saw Booth that day, spoke to him, sold him a horse, or served him a drink, is suddenly a person of interest. Booth's room at the National Hotel is searched. His belongings are cataloged. Letters are found, photos, personal effects. Everything becomes evidence. His connections are traced, his friends questioned, his movements over the past weeks reconstructed. The manhunt isn't just about Booth. The government wants everyone involved. They want the people who helped plan it, who provided weapons, who knew about it and didn't report it. The conspiracy will eventually ensnare 8 people who will be tried by military tribunal, with 4 of them hanged for their roles. But right now, in the hours after Lincoln's death, the focus is singular. Find John Wilkes Booth. He's approximately 30 miles away at this point, hiding in a thicket of trees with a broken leg, and David Harold, who met up with him after Powell's failed attack on Seward. They're heading toward Dr. Samuel Mudd's house, where Booth will get his leg set and begin the slow, painful journey deeper into Maryland. Tips start flooding in almost immediately. Booth was spotted in Baltimore, in Richmond, in Philadelphia, on a train heading west, hiding in a barn in Virginia. Most of these tips are wrong, the product of panic and overactive imaginations. Everyone sees suspicious strangers now. Everyone's neighbor suddenly looks like they could be hiding an assassin. But some tips are genuine. Someone saw a man matching Booth's description crossing into Maryland. Someone else saw him at a tavern. The trail's faint but real, and the detectives are following it, piecing together Booth's escape route, one witness at a time. The investigation is relentless. Stanton isn't sleeping, and he's making sure no one else in the War Department sleeps either. This is personal for him. He and Lincoln weren't close friends, but they worked together for years. Stanton respected Lincoln's leadership, even when they disagreed. And now Stanton is the one tasked with bringing his killer to justice. So, the manhunt expands. Hundreds of soldiers deployed, thousands of civilians enlisted, telegraph lines buzzing with updates and false leads, and occasional genuine progress. Newspapers printing special editions with sketches of Booth and descriptions of his appearance, and somewhere in the Maryland countryside, John Wilkes Booth is limping through the woods with a broken leg and a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, he's not going to be remembered as the hero he thought he'd be. Booth's 12 days on the run, John Wilkes Booth's mental image of his escape probably involved something dramatic and heroic. Riding triumphantly into the South, being celebrated as the man who avenged the Confederacy, maybe getting a medal or a parade or at least some appreciative applause. The reality is considerably less cinematic. He's riding through Maryland in the dark with a broken leg that's getting worse by the hour. Every movement of the horse jars the fracture, sending pain shooting up his leg. He's traveling with David Harold, who helped him escape, but is not exactly the most reliable companion under pressure. They reach Dr. Samuel Mudd's house around 4 a.m. on April 15th, just hours after the assassination. Mudd is a physician and Confederate sympathizer who knows Booth slightly. Whether he knows about the assassination when he treats Booth is disputed, but he sets the broken leg, provides a crutch, and lets them rest for several hours. This will cost Mudd dearly. He'll be arrested, tried as a conspirator, and sentenced to life in prison at Fort Jefferson in the Dry Tortugas. He'll eventually be pardoned, but the question of his involvement will follow him forever. Booth and Harold leave Mudd's house and head toward the home of Samuel Cox, another Confederate sympathizer. Cox hides them in a pine thicket near his property for 5 days. 5 days sitting in the woods, unable to move, barely able to eat, while Booth's leg throbs and federal troops search the area. During these days, hiding in the woods, Booth writes in his diary. He has a small pocket diary with him, and he uses it to record his thoughts, his justifications, his growing realization that history might not remember him kindly. One entry reads, "I struck boldly and not as the papers say. I walked with a firm step through 1,000 of his friends, was stopped, but pushed on." He's defensive already, reacting to newspaper accounts that are calling him a coward and assassin rather than a hero. Another entry, "I can never repent it, though we hated to kill. Our country owed all her troubles to him, and God simply made me the instrument of his punishment." Booth is still convinced he did the right thing, that Lincoln deserved death, that the South will appreciate his actions. But the newspapers he manages to see tell a different story. The South isn't celebrating. People are horrified. Even Confederate sympathizers are condemning the assassination. Booth killed Lincoln after the war ended, after Lee surrendered, after the fighting stopped. There's no military justification. It's just murder. Booth's confusion and frustration are evident in his writing. "I am here in despair," he writes. And why? For doing what Brutus was honored for. And yet I, for striking down a greater tyrant than they ever knew, am looked upon as a common cutthroat. He genuinely doesn't understand why people aren't praising him. In his mind, he's a patriot, a hero, someone who struck a blow for liberty. In reality, he's a murderer running from federal troops with a broken leg and diminishing hope. After 5 days in the woods, Cox arranges for Booth and Harold to be smuggled across the Potomac River into Virginia. The crossing is difficult. They try once and end up going in circles, spending hours rowing and ending up back on the Maryland side. Finally, on their second attempt, they make it across into Virginia. Virginia offers temporary relief. They're in Confederate territory now, or what used to be Confederate territory. They hide in another barn, then another. Local farmers help them, sometimes for money, sometimes out of residual Confederate loyalty, sometimes just because turning away injured men feels wrong, even if those men are wanted criminals. Booth's leg is getting worse. The break isn't healing properly. It's swollen, possibly infected. Walking is agony. He's dependent on Harold and whoever's helping them for basic mobility. The newspapers continue to be brutal. Booth reads accounts of the assassination, descriptions of himself as a coward and madman. The Confederacy he tried to avenge has officially condemned his actions. Jefferson Davis himself called the assassination deplorable. The South doesn't want Booth as their champion. They just want him gone. Booth's diary entries become more desperate, more confused. He doesn't understand why the narrative isn't going his way. He killed the tyrant. He avenged the South. Why isn't anyone grateful? The manhunt is closing in. Federal troops are searching barns and farms across Maryland and Virginia. The net is tightening. Every day Booth stays free is borrowed time, and he probably knows it. On April 24th, 12 days after the assassination, Booth and Harold are hiding in a tobacco barn near Port Royal, Virginia. The farm belongs to Richard Garrett, who has no idea who his guests really are. Booth is using an alias, claiming to be a wounded Confederate soldier heading home. That night, Federal cavalry surrounds the barn. The 12 days are about to end. The end of John Wilkes Booth. It's early morning on April 26th, 1865, and John Wilkes Booth has been running for 12 days. His leg is a disaster. He's exhausted, hungry, and hiding in a tobacco barn on Richard Garrett's farm near Port Royal, Virginia. David Harold is with him. Neither of them knows that Federal cavalry just surrounded the barn. The soldiers are from the 16th New York Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Edward Dougherty. They've been following tips and tracking Booth's movements across Maryland and into Virginia. A local man named Willie Jett, who helped transport Booth earlier, was captured and interrogated. He gave up Booth's location. Now 26 soldiers are surrounding a barn with 2 wanted men inside. Lieutenant Doherty shouts a warning. The barn is surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Surrender peacefully. Inside the barn, Booth and Harold have a brief, panicked conversation. Harold wants to surrender. Booth doesn't. Booth is still holding on to some version of the fantasy where he fights heroically and history remembers him as a brave defender of the South. Harold just wants to live. Harold surrenders first, walking out with his hands raised. The soldiers take him into custody. Now it's just Booth, alone in the barn, armed with a rifle and a pistol, facing 26 federal soldiers. The negotiation continues for about an hour. Booth shouts from inside the barn. He's willing to fight. He's not afraid to die. Various dramatic declarations that sound brave but don't change the fact that he's one injured man surrounded by 24 armed soldiers. Lieutenant Doherty loses patience. He orders the barn set on fire. If Booth won't come out, they'll smoke him out. The soldiers pile hay against the barn walls and light it. The fire catches quickly, dry tobacco barnwood going up fast. Smoke starts filling the interior. Flames spread across the walls. Inside, Booth can see the fire closing in. The heat is intense. The smoke is choking. He's limping toward the door, rifle in hand, probably still thinking he can go out fighting. Make it memorable, control the narrative one last time. Through a gap in the barn slats, Sergeant Boston Corbett sees movement. Corbett is a bit of an odd character, even by Civil War standards. He's deeply religious, possibly unstable, and has a reputation for erratic behavior. He's been told to capture Booth alive if possible, but he sees Booth moving with a weapon and makes a decision. Corbett fires. The bullet hits Booth in the back of the neck, severing his spinal cord almost exactly where Booth's bullet entered Lincoln's head. The symmetry is eerie, accidental, the kind of detail that makes history feel scripted. Booth drops. The rifle falls from his hands. He collapses onto the barn floor as the fire burns around him. Soldiers rush in, dragging Booth out of the burning barn before the whole structure collapses. They lay him on the grass. He's alive but paralyzed from the neck down. The bullet destroyed his spinal cord. He can't move. He can barely breathe. A doctor is summoned, but there's nothing to be done. This wound is as mortal as the one Booth gave Lincoln. The only difference is Booth is conscious, aware of what's happening, able to feel his body shutting down. He's found that carried to the Garrett farmhouse porch. He lies there for about 3 hours, dying slowly as the sun comes up. He can speak, barely, in whispers. The soldiers lean close to hear him. At one point, Booth asks to see his hands. Someone lifts them into his view. Booth looks at them and whispers, "Useless, useless." Whether he means his hands are useless because he's paralyzed, or his entire plan was useless, or his life was useless, is unclear. Maybe all three. His last words, according to most witnesses, are, "Tell mother I died for my country," which is technically true, though not in the heroic way he imagined. He did die for his country, in the sense that his country hunted him down and shot him for murdering its president. John Wilkes Booth dies around 7 a.m. on April 26, 1865, 14 days after he shot Abraham Lincoln. He's 26 years old, famous, talented, and ultimately remembered for exactly one thing: the worst thing he ever did. His body is taken back to Washington, identified, and buried in a secret location to prevent Confederate sympathizers from making his grave a shrine. His diary is confiscated, entered as evidence in the conspiracy trials. The manhunt is over. The conspiracy is unraveling. 8 people will be tried by military tribunal. 4 will be hanged, including Mary Surratt, the first woman executed by the federal government. The others will be imprisoned. And somewhere in that terrible April between Lincoln's death and Booth's, America transformed. The president who saved the Union became a martyr, a symbol, a legend that would far outlast his actual years, and the actor who killed him became a warning, a cautionary tale, a name synonymous with infamy. Both of them gone. Both of them remembered. One for saving a nation, one for trying to destroy it. And with that, the story of that terrible night in Ford's Theater finally ends. A president who saved the Union but couldn't save himself, and an actor who wanted to be Brutus but became a cautionary tale instead. Lincoln died in a boarding house bedroom that was too small for his body and too small for his legacy. Booth died in a burning barn, paralyzed and confused, still wondering why nobody called him a hero. History remembered them both, but only one of them got to belong to the ages. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, be grateful you've never had to make decisions that affected millions, sit through a 3-hour play with questionable security, or discover that murdering someone for dramatic effect doesn't actually make you the protagonist. The theater is dark now. The curtain has fallen. Sleep well, and remember, sometimes the most important thing you can do is just stay in your chair and do your job.